Everybody. Welcome to a second hour event as part of our 25th anniversary of Open and Affirming at Danville Congregational Church. This is just the beginning. The celebration will continue all month long. We're going to have a panel discussion. We had 5 years ago, we had a second hour discussion about the history of our becoming open and affirming, and it was mostly Dave Hill and me. This time we have a broader panel, and we're going to spend part of the time on the history, and then part of the time on going forward. Where do we go next? So I'm going to sit down, but I want to ask the panel a couple of questions about the history of how we became open and affirming 25 years ago. And I'm not checking my phone. I have the questions on my phone. Okay. So the first question for our panelists, and this refers to the people who were actually part of the process 25 years ago. What was your role in the process of becoming open and affirming? And what resources did you have to help us on this journey? And I'm going to call on Chris first to respond to that.
Hi. As much as I can remember, as I think back 25 years, I think, I don't really remember much about 25 years ago, except I was raising kids. But I was at a conference in San Francisco, at a church in San Francisco, and they were talking about transgender. I thought, what is transgender? Never heard of that before. And then they started talking about open and affirming, and churches becoming open and affirming and so forth. And I thought, and then they explained what it was and what the process was that you had to go through and so forth. And I went home and it really moved me. And because I thought, who in the world would reject somebody in a church of all places for being gay? And then at that time I was working in hospice, and I had a couple of patients who were AIDS patients who were dying, and they talked to me about their experience just in the conversations that we had of church and religion. And they told me about the ostracizing that they had when they came out to their families or to their church and were asked to leave and not come back because they were sinful and were a better place to be a sin than a church. But anyway, so I came home and I really thought about this a lot. And my children had grown up in this church since my littlest was 2 years old. And they were in junior high and high school at the time, and I thought, what would happen in our church if one of my kids turned out to be gay? And I knew it would be fine with me, but what would our church do? The church who loved them all these years and cared about them and thought they were good people, if they said they were gay, what would happen? And I realized I didn't know. And so I talked to people at the conference, and they told us about what we needed to do to become an open and affirming church. And I felt very strongly that that's what I wanted our church to be, because I didn't want my children ostracized if they were gay. And so we started meeting and had meetings about once a month, and sometimes had speakers, sometimes we just had discussion. But The biggest thing that came up for a number of people is, why do we have to announce that we're open and affirming? Why do we have to do that? Why don't we just let people come to our church and find out that we're friendly and nice and so forth? And what's the purpose? And so we try to convey the importance of gay people understanding, knowing publicly that we were an open and affirming church, and that they could come here and they wouldn't be ostracized. They'd be welcome and they'd be loved. And so it really came from a deep personal feeling about it, and my thinking about it, and learning what transgender meant and what ONA was and so forth, that we began to get together, and with Dave and Betty and a number of other people, and just learn what it was all about, and realize that we needed to do it slowly, and we needed to do it openly, with love for people's rejection of it, the idea, and acceptance of the idea, and educate people about what it was. And so that's how it began. And we went from there. Took us a couple of years, but we did it.
Thank you, Chris. Anyone else want to reflect on those early days? Dave?
I've got that. I just wanted to start by thanking Chris for being the person who really brought all this to our church. She advocated for it a number of times for several years, I think. But I then get to some of the concrete stuff that I know about. One of the things that happened to me and got me deeply involved is that I was named moderator in 1996. I was elected, and that was in June, as usual. And in our August planning meeting for the council, we said this should be an important thing for us to do this year. So in September, our pastor at the time, Elizabeth Feltz, called a bunch of us together and said, what do we do? How are we going to do this? And that among the people that were there and who are now here are Chris and me and Doug Leach. She involved the officers of council. She involved those who were in charge of Christian ed, whatever. And we got together so that a bunch of people met in September to discuss this, and out of that came a committee which included Chris and me and Doug. And the rest of those people who are involved are no longer part of this church, mostly because they moved. So that's how I got started. And as Chris mentioned, we did a bunch of classes and things. We had materials from the National Church and from other areas which had done this. My particular involvement was in forming the statement for what does open and affirming mean to those of us in this church. And with other help, we gathered from other churches who had been open and affirming what their languages were, what they had said. We worked on what we wanted and what exists now in the church, on the church website is in fact the same thing we came up with. So I was deeply involved in that. And finally, at the annual meeting in 1998, I was the one who came to talk to the entire congregation about what does this mean? what are we voting on? And we had a particular way of making sure that when we went through the voting discussion, how are we going to do it, tried to make sure that everybody was happy or everybody was involved, and it was, as you know, a success.
Yes, thank you, Dave. I want to ask Betty if she wants to say anything about this, but before I do, Dave mentioned the process of developing an open and affirming statement, and this is a little brochure which you probably have seen. This is something that's available right outside the church office and often in the narthex as well. It's called Open and Affirming, What Does It Mean? And it contains the statement, the open and affirming statement that we adopted back in 1999. Did you have anything you wanted to talk about, Betty? Because I'm asking Betty because Dave said he was the moderator when this process started in 1996, and Betty was the moderator when the process ended in 1999.
The only thing that comes up to me when Chris was talking is that we both came to this because of our care and interest in the AIDS epidemic. In the epidemic of HIV, AIDS, and both of us, as you know, are nurses, and I had a lot of experience trying to teach nursing students about HIV, including having students say, I'm not going to go in that room. I'm not going to touch that person. I'm not going to, They were simply afraid. So the whole AIDS education piece, of course, included the understanding that people are people and they're sick, and we always care for people who are sick, no matter what. And so I think Chris reminded me of that now, and that's actually how Jim and I came to this church, because we had school board members, our kids were here, we had school board members who were adamantly against HIV education. And they wanted deniers of HIV and AIDS to come and talk in classrooms. They talked, it was just disgusting. And I'm sitting in one of these curriculum development meetings as a parent, and I'm sitting next to Paul Foreman, who was the minister of this church. And we started talking, and that's how Jim and I came to this church, because Paul and I were the ones that were saying, this is completely unscientific. You have no right to do this kind of stuff. And as parents, we stood up, and it was just a reminder of those times. So that's...
Okay, I'm going to go to the second of three main questions that...
Could I say
Sure.
something first? One thing I wanted to mention was the involvement of the pastor at this point, was Elizabeth Phelps. She had consciously decided not to be part of the committee, which I think was the right politically and personally for her. But she supported us the whole time. And during the process when we were getting near this, she preached several times on open and affirming, on what does the Bible say about homosexuality, for example. And the last time right before we were voting was the discussion on, she did moving on, what are we doing, what is moving on, and the final one was why do we have to become open and affirming? And I think that one was one which was particularly meaningful.
Yes, thank you. And so the second question that I have, my phone went blank, so I have to pull it up again. The second question is, what were some of the obstacles you encountered along the way? What were some of the happy surprises? And I'll start this one because we've already talked about starting the process in the fall of 1996 and ending with the positive vote in June of 1999. That's almost a 3-year period. During that 3-year period, the Open and Affirming Task Force developed a plan for how to educate the members of the congregation on what open and affirming really means, and why should we do it, and why don't we just not do it? And so to do that, we held an astounding 20 second-hour sessions of educational materials. We did 4 separate sets. We did one set of second-hour, what do you call it? Call it a class, a second-hour series of classes in the spring of '97, in the fall of '97, in the spring of '98, and in the spring of '99. And between those, it added up to 20 second-hour sessions. So that was one of the obstacles, was putting that together and getting people to come, and people did come. Anyone else want to reflect on that one?
I just wanted to say that I only am aware of one family, one couple who left the church because we voted to become open and affirming, and the vote for it was unanimous. So it was really
I think
worth.
the record shows that it wasn't unanimous.
It wasn't unanimous?
No,
I thought
it was overwhelming.
Yeah, I thought it was. Was there a dissent?
There were dissents.
Okay, I didn't remember that.
I'm trying, it was 70, sorry.
I'm sorry.
The vote was 76 to 12 on should we become open and affirming. And I agree with Chris. I know of at least one person who left, and there were several, I believe, but I don't know. I don't remember the names, nor is that helpful.
Happy surprises? I guess I mentioned one happy surprise, that so many people came to those 20 classes, but anyone else?
Well, I would say, and I was going to actually put it down as, put it down as we talk about the future steps, et cetera, and we can get to it there, but one of the things that amazes me, because I'm doing a lot of work trying to hear community voices now in community health. That's what, we can't get grants, we can't do anything until we know that we are hearing from all kinds of voices in the community. Well, the open and affirming experience for our church was exactly that. So those 20 things were not lectures. Those were people really coming to learn about how they felt and how it would be for them, really absorbing and developing their own thoughts about all of it, about having a child who was gay, about feeling gay yourself. I mean, all of those things that we do that we're now doing about race, right? We're coming to terms with what our particular response is to this dilemma we're in. And so that process of consensus building and coming to a vote, I mean, that is so cool and so precious, you guys. And it's something that a church can do. Sometimes communities can never do it. Sometimes societies never do it. But man, that is something that was, it's now occurring to me as I get older, that was a precious process and that we should never take it for granted, because we can keep using that process when the next big dilemma comes along.
Yeah, I'll give a happy surprise. We moved here from Seattle in 1984. We joined, or started attending the church and joined now again. There we go. So during this process, Kathy and I were not part of the Open and activities. However, we're around, and some of that rubs off onto you in the congregation without you maybe realizing what's going on. So it was then when we became members of the church, close to the approval of the ONA, that our son came out to us as gay. And we were then equipped somehow even though not part of the process, to understand the substance of what was going on and how love takes care and formulates the relationship. And that has been the ability for me to be such a contributor and interested party in PFLAG, because what I have learned is, first of all, is the importance from speaking from your own perspective with limited ability to share the exact experience of someone else, particularly in my world, like transgender or something like that. However, what has benefited from me is the continuing of the process, because I thought I was pretty open-minded, but with a gay son and participating now through the church and the process, I have become so much better equipped to be a full member of society. And I emphasize in PFLAG the connection to all marginalized people. And when you understand that concept and build it in, it is such a valuable contribution from my personal and Kathy's experience. Beautiful benefit, thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. So the next question I'm going to ask is, how has our church changed in the last 25 years? So, but before we leave the time 1996 to 99, the process of becoming open and affirming, I wanted to ask people in the audience if you have any questions about that period, about that process, and if there's anyone on Zoom from the chat that has a question or comment about the process, we could take that first before we go on. Anybody? Carol. Carol's question is, how large was the congregation when we started the process?
I would guess it's about 200. We had something like 100 people or at the annual meeting. So I think it was probably 200 to 250 people at that time. That number exists, of course, but I didn't look it up. May I add a comment here, Doug? One of the things that happened as a result of this, and I was involved in, is in 1999 we were also entering, after we did this vote, we're taking part in a search for a new pastor. Our Elizabeth Phelps also resigned in 1999. And we set up a search committee for the new pastor, and I was named that chair. So I got involved in that, and in a lot of that discussion I don't need to give you, but one of the people we came across was Alan Keltzner. And when I had the first conversation with him, his first question was, "Are you ONA?" And I'm sure I could say yes. And he said something like, I can't quote him directly, "Thank God." Yeah. It was pretty clear to me that he did not want to be involved in that process again.
Okay. Todd.
No, I was just commenting. I thought maybe there was another reason, because he was open and affirming himself.
I think that's certainly true.
Todd, you had your hand up. Todd's question is, how did we handle the difficult conversations between two people in the congregation that didn't think we should do it and were, had real concerns about the process?
I had to have two of those conversations because I was moderator. they were classic difficult conversations. I tried to just listen, and I said, you know, this was after the vote, and I said, you know, we hope that you will stay with us. We welcome you. And one person said, we'll stay. And then the other person said, there's no way. I can't. And I had to accept that. And it was a good one to try and practice being accepting and open to people's individual feelings. So they were difficult conversations, but gosh, if we could have those kinds of conversations now, it would be so much better, but it's very, very difficult.
Well, I was just going to say that we kept reminding people that the reason that we were doing this was not so much for us, but for people who were gay, who needed a church. It wasn't something that we needed to do. I mean, I certainly needed it to be done. Oh, I certainly needed it to be done. But it was just, we kept reminding people the reason we were doing it was for gay people to know that we were open and affirming and they could come here and be welcomed and loved. And we kept driving that home.
I just wanted to, many of us have been through multiple annual meetings. Usually annual meetings are yes, yes, yes. That was not true of this particular annual meeting. We had a very active discussion of this question, did we want to become open and affirming? We had done several things to make sure that everybody was included. We had a first vote of, do you want to consider open and affirming at this point? We agreed yes by something like 68 to 70 some. When we had we then had the discussion, we made a motion to become open and affirming, and there was a very active discussion, including by people who were opposed. Most of the opposition, I would say, was not because of open. We all agreed that we want to be open, but affirming was the problem. What did that mean? I think we handled that reasonably well. I am prejudiced, but it was my responsibility at that time to be the one who presented the motion to the congregation, and to then lead the discussion back and forth. So I think we tried very hard, and I'm glad very much that we did it. I think it is probably, having gone through this service today, I don't know that any of us thought at the time that had this envisioned, but I'm glad that we're here, and I'm glad the Open and Affirming here has evolved as it has into a very vital part of this church.
Yes, thanks. And so now I want to turn to this third question. We're going to put 1999 in the rearview mirror, and the question is, how has Danville Congregational Church changed in the 25 years since we've become open and affirming? And I want to turn to Bruce and Kathy to start with that, because they weren't part of the process in 1999, and so they have been a part of the process in the 25 years since.
So what I would comment is the community has changed distinctly, and so you can't remain in status quo. So over time, you need to adapt to your congregation, our congregation, to the neighborhood. And what have we seen? Major changes. A big change particularly has been what I would say not just a transgender, but the non-binary understanding. That's a broader concept than just transgender. There's so much to be learned and experienced in this activity, and our adaptation to it in our own way, I have very much witnessed it, and we see it in a lot of subtleties all the time that give a feeling of connection to us. We don't necessarily have to have classes all the time, but I personally do feel it's time to reaffirm maybe some of the understandings, because we have a lot of new folks in the church, or people that didn't really understand the affirming part and still would like to know it better, or be reacquainted with what the scripture means in this regards. So all that has changed, and we are continuing to adapt. So I understand I'm starting to lead in a little bit as to where we might go in the future, but the ability of Kathy and I to come out, first of all, in a very family-oriented way, measured way. You learn what works. You get your elevator speeches of a few words and practice them, and they work. You see what doesn't work so well, and you start to come out. One of the first big outings for us was to make people in the congregation know that we were proud parents, okay? And that led us also then to become exposed to a lot of other people in the church that would come up and tell us their personal story without formalized activities. And the amount of connections that we made to people in the church were outstanding. A lot of those people have moved on today, so there's continuation of the evolution that goes on. And there's new adjustments that we'll get to, because you just see the politicization that is going on. There's more to go that we'll follow up on. But that was just recognizing the change in how we continue to work at it and adapt it and continue to put action to the welcoming speech, but continuing to have our websites express who we are, to greet people, and find out more opportunities to embrace people on a personal basis. I think was the big change that I've seen over the 25 years.
I think Bruce projected that very well for both of us. Something I'd like for you to realize is that when we were doing the Open and Affirming 25 years ago, that Chris Rowan, who was a former member of our church and a professional writer, gathered all the information, the historical information on our project, and put it together in an amazing presentation. And we've run off some extra copies for people to have, and so we'd be happy to give those to you as you're leaving. They're right here in my lap.
So while we're doing this, we really do want audience participation. So if you have questions and observations from your standpoint, it's not just us here at the panel.
It's bringing about a lot of memories, but one of the things too that I remember being worried about that you didn't mention is that we thought maybe we would become the gay church, and it would be just packed with gays. We should be so lucky, right? And that there would be no room for the non-gay population. And so that was one of the discussions that we also had to have. There was an enormous amount of education, because really we, knew nothing. I remember one panel in particular, there was a great big muscular guy who was part of the drug enforcement agency or something, and he said, I just ask you please not to I don't think we had his last name or anything, because he was still in a position where he couldn't come out in his workplace, because that would have been a danger to him. And there was another woman on the panel who had 2 gay sons who were twins. And she said, I'm rethinking my whole parenting thing because I was prepared for teenage boys who you say, when your friends are all back in your bedroom, you have to leave the door open if there's a girl. She says, but now I have to also say, you have to keep the door open if there's a boy. So we had a lot of, a lot of laughter, it wasn't all just, yeah.
A lot of singing. You want me to give my ideas, or do you? Mine's kind of a big picture thing, because Doug suggested that I talk about, so now where do we go from here? Do we just leave this history like we do a lot of other history? Or where's our next step on becoming open and affirming? And when I began to think about it, and talking with Jim about it, we wanted to know from you all about what does affirming mean? And affirming changes, right? I, for one, feel like investigation of anyone who feels like the other. How do we explore where there are people who feel outside, unwelcome, not able to be a guest, or not able to be part of a community? It's really a community-building thing that searches and scans for people who need affirmation. And that's our role as Christians, right? To welcome and to have radical hospitality. And so I think, as we have done, frankly, in the last 5-6 years, exploring, learning about race has been an example of the same kind of work that we all did back then around being open and affirming. But it's my perspective that in the future, we will keep having issues come up, and as a community, there will be people like the Hicksons, like Chris, who have found their energy and their action based in a problem that they feel is not unchristian, is unchristian. In other words, where are we not finding and giving radical hospitality? And so I think there's plenty of work for us to do, certainly with the legitimaquois issues and things. But I know, having learned and gone through this process around that, it's just something I know is an unfairness that we can address. And the same thing I feel that we're doing around about race. I feel that our anti-racism and justice committees, we're exploring those things all the time. And we're finding and being on this racial journey that is going to change my life. It already has. And I feel like we're all on these journeys as individuals, but we're also on this journey together at church. And that is the reason we are in community and why this is such a special place. So bring up the next issue, you guys.
So you just did bring up the next issue, which was where do we go from here? And I want to turn to Pastor Todd to say something about that. So let him have the mic.
I didn't get to preach today, so I mean, indirectly, I guess I did, didn't I? But I have notes, Bob. You're right.
Oh, you're joining the panel. Okay.
So I want to share just a few details about the open and affirming process and how it points us forward. And just for context, the UCC likes to bill itself as a church of firsts, and it has been first in many areas. But just for context, it wasn't until 1985 that the UCC issued a resolution to call on our churches to declare themselves open and affirming. So that didn't happen until 85. In 1991, the United Church of Christ issued a resolution to affirm gay, lesbian, and bisexual persons, just the LGB, and their ministries. So 85, 6 years, they're like, their gifts are valuable in our church. Their ministry is valuable, but it took that resolution to make that happen. And then in 99, this church becomes the 317th of a few thousand churches to become open and affirming. So that's 85, 91, 99. It wasn't until 2003 that the UCC affirmed the ministry and rights of transgender people. So we kind of have this maybe vision that it was everybody LGBTQ, but
We're done.
it wasn't. And so even the UCC evolved and modeled that. And then 20 years later, at the Synod this last summer, the conferences of the Southeast and the Florida Conference, which includes the Florida, Alabama, Mississippi churches, put forth a resolution to focus on meeting the needs of trans and non-binary youth, seeking to protect equitable rights for all trans and non-binary people while they are being actively present. And if you know kind of the map of where the fight is, where the struggle is to protect LGBTQ plus people, it's everywhere. It's even in San Francisco, but it's in places like Florida, where those folks are most urgently under attack. The conference minister of the Southeast Conference said there have been so many oppressive acts, not just from this time, but for a long time, and we felt in bringing forth this resolution that since the UCC has clearly made a statement that we stand for, and accompany and value people who are transgender and non-binary, that we need to go a step further. We really need to pay attention to what is happening now and engage in it. Y'all all know the statistics: higher rates of violence and death experienced by queer teenagers, and particularly trans and non-binary youth, and disproportionately high amounts of violence among transgender women of color. So you can go online and read that. I can share those links later. Reverend Derek Terry leads the Open and Affirming program for the UCC, and in conversations with them about what's next, like we don't just get to a point and stop. Our container may hold all that, but we may not have thought of everything that we need to be thinking about. Here's some suggestions, and I want you to think as you hear these and see. It's not a process of determining that our open and affirming covenant isn't good enough. It is an opportunity for us to think about, can it grow? So here's some things that Reverend Terry and their team suggests. Feature LGBTQ plus members in leadership roles, like leading worship, giving sermons, or participating in service projects. Check. It matters that Megan and Emily Luther stood up behind here with Emma fighting for the microphone. Y'all remember that day? Yes. But it matters that they felt like that space was for them and that we saw them in that space. And I don't know, Doug, Chris, if y'all ever envisioned having a gay pastor, much less two gay male pastors at the same time. Y'all did that.
Well, we didn't envision it then, but we did later.
Yeah. Invite LGBTQ plus individuals to share their faith journeys and experiences of being welcomed by the church. Incorporate LGBTQ plus inclusive language in prayers, hymns, and readings. Consider music by LGBTQ plus artists or themes of inclusion. Pride Month celebrations, blessings for same-gender couples, Transgender Day of Visibility or Transgender Day of Remembrance. How many of you have attended a TDOR or a TDOV? Yep, that's a growing edge for us. Rainbow flags and symbols. Gender-neutral bathrooms. Pronoun pins. Well, we're getting there. Have y'all got your sticker? And it's an invitation. It's not, nobody's going to shame you if you don't, but it's an invitation. We can talk more about why that's important. LGBTQ plus educational resources like second hour conversations. Safe space for conversations. Create safe spaces for queer individuals. And I use the umbrella term queer and also claim that for myself. It doesn't always equate, but you'll hear me use that shorthand. LGBTQ plus potlucks or social gatherings organized or sponsored by the LGBTQ plus group of the church. We have an LGBTQ, Legitimaquah Justice Ministry. If you are on that, would you raise your hand just so we can see who you are?
By the way, that's the name that Pastor Todd has dubbed it. That wasn't what we named it, but it's now the Legitimaquah
Task Force, yeah.
Justice Committee, the
So-
Legitimaquah Justice Committee.
If you would like to be a part of that ministry, you are welcome to join this group of folks who are looking ahead. Family ministry, offer inclusive family ministry programs that welcome all families regardless of structure. And volunteer opportunities for LGBTQ causes, partnering with LGBTQ plus organizations like Rainbow Community Center for volunteer opportunities, not just giving, which is super important, but also going and being involved in their work, in their ministry. So those are a few things to look at as we consider how we can expand and deepen our covenant of not just welcoming, but affirming. And I would take it even further, as I've seen one congregation do, celebrating the presence of queer people in the community. And as has been alluded to, this is intersectional. Every justice cause that you care about, every one of them is intersectional to gender and sexuality and race and in Gaza, you name it. They're all related issues. And so expanding that helps us deepen our commitments in those areas. Reverend Terry reminds us that our actions speak louder than our words. The fact that you drive by and see a sign is good. I'm glad that new sign is out there. We'll have a banner soon talking about Valley Pride. But what's it like when you come in here into this space? As we continue how we might expand into our, more deeply into our covenant, we will think about, is this a safe space? You might have wondered, is this a safe space for gay people back in the day? Would they experience microaggressions? I'll share one from my experience. One of the common questions that people love to come up and ask, or would love to come up and ask, is, well, which one of you is the wife and which one of you is the husband? What? That actually happened in worse questions. And as we think about non-binary and gender-expansive trans folks, is this a safe place for them? Are we gonna have done our work to know what not to ask, to know how to see them, to know how to introduce ourselves to them and receive their introductions to us? Are they going to have to go searching, follow the signs all the way to the back to get to a gender-neutral bathroom? I'm not saying gendered bathrooms are wrong. They're a part of our culture, but that's a consideration. And I will tell you that I confidently invited Elder Carmarian to our church because I know it will be a safe space for her. I know that we've done our work, we're doing our work, and this will be a safe space for her. He also reminds us that it's important to continue to build a welcoming environment and understand that it's ongoing. So these folks started it, we're going to continue it, and the folks that come behind us are going to expand it even further. And then celebrate the diversity. Just look around us. There's a diversity of life experience in this room. There's a diversity of our experience with our children and our grandchildren. This church has raised gay kids and transgender kids. And as you expand that out, you find out that there are people with gay children and gay or trans grandchildren. We're already diverse, but we are united, metaphorically, underneath this rainbow toward an even more expansive welcome. So those are considerations for 2.0, 3.0 as we apply to the UCC to be recertified. But I'm feeling pretty good about the work that we've already done. And yeah, there's some challenges, but that's good. That keeps us agile and nimble. So that's what I have to share. Thanks.
Thank you. So you referred to a UCC call to be recertified, is the word you gave. Could you just say what exactly, where that came from and what exactly the request is?
Yeah, and I want to put that in the context of this attempt to become an anti-racist church. When working with the anti-racism team leadership, we were looking for resources that could help us. We want to get that certification. We want to do the courses. We love that, right? We love the process. We love to learn. We like to get everything in order. And I'm not making fun of it. I'm just noting that's what we like to do. And the national office folks were like, you know, we learned from the open and affirming process that sometimes when you achieve a certification, then you think you're done. And that's been kind of the challenge, especially for a church that is an early adopter, that you get that certification, you've become open and affirming, check, you're done. You don't have to do anything else. Well, that isn't the case with open and affirming, and it isn't the case with anti-racism. That's something we can work toward. We may arrive at that point, and we may not. But the movement with the national office is to ask all of the certified churches to do this work, this intentional work of making sure that they really are truly open and affirming in this day and age.
Okay, thank you. So I want to open it up to both the panelists and the people who are here in our sanctuary. If you have questions and comments. Yeah, Mary Kay.
I was here in '99, and it took me, I was just sharing with someone a few moments ago, it took me maybe 8, 10 years until it finally dawned on me that this building is preordained to be open and affirming because of the windows. Hello?
Tom has a comment.
You know, I think we do a great job of being open. As affirming, though, I don't know how people give feedback to the church. If they have any issues, if they're uncomfortable, or how does that process work? Does it just go to one person and then just evaporate? Or is there a mechanism, perhaps, where we can all becoming understanding of how the affirming process that we're supposedly involved in is really happening?
So anybody else with a comment or a question?
Well, let me just reflect on what Tom has said. For queer people, well, for many people, but let's talk about for queer people, coming in those doors is a huge risk because they don't know what affirming. They might have Googled us and found that, but they don't know. And they may come in and they may sit there at the back, and the second it's over, they leave. Maybe they've heard something that they didn't like, or maybe they still don't trust the church. We've got a lot to work on, and so I'm not sure how we collect that feedback. So I don't know if you're saying we need a process of checking ourselves or making sure that information that we get in our various ministries is filtered through church leadership to make sure that, wow, we didn't do so well in this instance.
Couple of hands back there.
I just want to ask, please, could we have some more classes? Because, 25 years ago, all we had was the 3, and now we've got legit quoi. And there's a lot of things I really don't know very much about. I would like to learn.
Check.
Well, I'm glad we're talking about affirming because I think affirming is a self-examination process that would be good to go through. And Dottie and I have a nephew who's gay, and his father, who's a very proud ex-Marine major, just would not affirm his son, and I think he still doesn't affirm his son. And it is a terribly hurtful thing not to be affirmed. And so I just urge us to, maybe the next part of what does affirming mean? And how do you feel? And this gets into the racial area as well, or gender, and it can be a whole array of exploration of how do you feel if you're not, even if you come into a situation with young people, and you're an older person, and they don't think you're too cool because you're older. And so just to go through that humbling exercise of how do you feel if you're not affirmed, and how can you help others feel affirmed?
If you'll pass the mic back, Bob, to Richard. Yeah, so we're now at 11 minutes after the hour, and we need to make way for God's Way Church, which uses a sanctuary. So
This will be brief.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, can you hear me okay? I just wanted to comment about, with the open and affirming, and wanting to know that people who are from the, I won't even try to say legitimate, I'm going to say community, know that this is a safe, open, and affirming place. I think it's also so important to continue on with our process of letting the general public know that. Those of us who are straight but are allies need to know, and I'm sure there's a lot of people like that out in the community. Richard and I left our previous church because it was becoming a direction that we couldn't handle, and came specifically here because it was open and affirming, and kind of saying, echoing, I didn't know that about the Feltons, that transition, you know, what moved you to look here. But I just wanted to affirm the importance of that to our general community, because people will have children they will find later, maybe, who are gay. We have a grandson who's joined us at this church occasionally, who lives out of the area, and he is gay. And so, you know, how wonderful. He loves this church. He's been here maybe 3 times, but one of them was when all this was up, and he just feels this is a wonderful place. So we keep attracting allies as well. Just wanted to say that.
Let me jump in on that affirming comment one more time and try to wrap it up. I think one of our next ONA 2.0 steps is taking our light out from under that bushel, you know that song, This Little Light of Mine, and letting this community be more aware that we're here, which is going to come with some risk. We live in an ugly world, even out here in the Bay Area, but that's a growing edge for us. The other thing with respect to affirming that I want to share with you is that when I'm here among you, and Miguel and I are with you, we don't feel like we're gay, like that's how you see us. I mean, yeah, of course you see me as gay, duh. But I'm not, I just feel like we just feel like we're one of you. Our relationship, the way we engage in ministry, that's affirming. That is an affirming environment. I'm here, we're together, we're all different, but it isn't an exception. It doesn't set us apart. Good job, church. Good job.
And that's where we want to go for all of us, because we all have feelings of being the other. Bob Howe mentioned aging, and I bet you a bunch of us in this room feel kind of unaccepted now because we're past our prime. But it's part of being affirming and part of the radical hospitality.
Yeah, you're touching on something that is really important to me in terms of the ability to grow the church in this type of an environment where congregation sizes are decreasing. And the more that we can individually grow our circles wider is an important concept. Being able, many of you don't really know me, frankly. You just know me from a little bit here in church. I don't know many of you. The ability as Kristen is sponsoring some luncheons where you get to know people. You know people not as gay. My son doesn't want to be known as the gay teacher. He's a teacher. He would like to walk through these doors not being the gay son of Bruce. He grew up in this church, but he doesn't come through these doors. He would like to come through just like anyone else, okay? And when we get together in small groups, in our working environments on commissions and things, we get to know each other fairly well, but that's still within a narrow window. The more that we can just know people on open-ended terms, then what you find out, you have common denominators that make you connect. It might be someone like me about fishing or whatever it is, or my business background or whatever it is. And when you do that, you form these connections which make these other issues that you can share in a broader perspective. And I relate this to our ability, after we come out, to still maintain many people who are not really big ONA or queer people or any other association, but they know us on a more broader basis. So over time, though, we've been able to share and them appreciate us as individuals, so that when we speak something or call something about making a gay joke, they apologize to us, and they've come back to us and say, we're not members of your church, but we have appreciation for it. Those common denominators are so important. So I look at this panel. This is not a very diversified panel, is it, when you think about it? Just think it. We're a bunch of allies, basically, up here. So we have so many ways yet to grow and know each other through these miniature socialization activities. So that's my pet story.
Thank you, Bruce. And with that, I need to call time, unless you have a last word, Dave.
I'm fine.
Thank you for sticking with us. Okay.
I have
Last
one
word to
thing
Chris.
I would like to say is, while we were doing this, Tom and I went to lunch at a restaurant where we frequented pretty often, and the waitresses knew us. And we came from a meeting of one of our ONA sessions, and we sat down, and she came over and said, what would you like? And I said, I'd like a BLT or a LGBT. And she said, she knew exactly what I meant, and she laughed heartily, but it just came out instead of an LBT. Anyway, that's how you guys.
That's great.
Thank you.